Shh. Μουσείο Benaki Close-ups, με πρωταγωνιστές αντικείμενα έξω από τις προθήκες.
Thank you for still being with us despite the late hour. My name is Sophia Handaka. You've been seeing me all day. I'm the CoMuseum host and curator of world cultures at the Benaki Museum. In this last closing remarks panel, we have with us Alexandra Bounia, professor of museology at the Department of Cultural Technology and Communication of the University of the Aegean, Prodromos Tsiavos, head of digital and innovation at Onassis Foundation, Jenny White, that you just saw before, head of visual arts program at the British Council, and our amazing moderator, CoMuseum International Advisory Committee member and lead, the director of audience engagement at the National Museum of American History, Smithsonian Institution, Adam Reed Rozan. I will give the floor to him, and he's going to lead the discussion today. Adam.
Thank you very much, Sophia. We really appreciate it. The CoMuseum has always been a place about ideas. It's a place for sharing. It's a place for community. And this year, our 10th year, is no different. This year has certainly been about ideas. Earlier today, I heard Catherine share that the time is now for us to relearn, rethink, in many cases, throw away what we know and start afresh. Start anew. She shared that she has done that many times. So with that mindset, I have approached today with a beginner's mindset. That's how I'm going to approach the next half hour. So I want to jump in right away and ask this great group of folks, what's resonating with you from what you've been hearing today? What's resonating? And maybe we'll start with Pro. What are you hearing? What's resonating for you?
Thank you, Adam. Quite a few things, actually. I'll just share with you, like, very quickly, 4 ideas that came from our panel. And the first one is about museums finally coming on in the 21st century in a very violent fashion, but actually being forced to consider technology, not necessarily use it, but think what they really are. I mean, are they just about doing exhibitions, or are they about building communities, about speaking up? So that's one thing. Second thing is the understanding the medium. So, or to put it in another way, not yet another 360, please. So how can we actually make use of the media that we have at our disposal as they are used? And we have seen that particularly in terms of social media, where we've seen types of interactions which we didn't expect, or they were totally expected in the social media realm, but not in the museum realm. And we are seeing it now. The third thing is the unexpected uses of data. And I think it was really chilling to hear that Louvre they could see in the numbers which countries would actually get into lockdown, because they would see Spain to leave, Italy to leave. So they would see the numbers reducing because people just couldn't travel. And that shows us that was in itself
That's great.
Amazing moments in the negative sense. And finally, the hidden treasures, the hidden digital treasures. We've done digital stuff for decades now. I had two of my panelists saying, look, when we came during the pandemic and the lockdown and said, look, that's our collection. We had different newspapers or sites saying, wow, they digitized their collection and this thing has been there forever. But now they've seen it. So This is a moment of revelation.
That's great. Thank you, Pro. Alexandra, what's resonating for you from today?
I have also a few points. Thank you, Adam. The first point has to do with museums questioning their social role. I think that this came up from the first keynote that we heard Elizabeth Mary talking about museums needing to think again about their assets and how they can use their assets in order to address issues of social inequalities and social justice. We heard a lot about social fragmentation by Laurie Fogarty regarding, the efforts the museum makes to connect with the community, to address issues of social fragmentation and how they use their data, their contacts, their connections with the institution. I found really interesting the fact that there is a constant connection between two things that usually are addressed separately. One, social sustainability and financial sustainability. During many of our discussions, they were brought together and they were connected in a really creative and interesting way. I think that this was also connected to capacity building and the need to reconsider and think again the role of the people working in museums on two different levels. Mm-hmm. We heard about the need for museums to reconsider the expertise they expect from their staff and the skills that they expect from their staff. But at the same time, the need for museum staff to be also trained or to learn new skills and to learn new ways of being museum staff. And then I think that my favorite phrase of the day is the phrase regarding what museums can do. And what they can do is that they can emotionally and intellectually empower people. I love this phrase. I will keep saying it for the rest of the day or maybe the week. And finally, my understanding from many of the speakers, the keynote speakers, but also of the discussions, is that there's a lot of there is a big need for a new ethics or a new way of understanding the museum and a new way of behaving as museums. We need a new museums ethic, I think.
Got it. And let's go back to that in a little bit. Jenny and then Sophia, what's resonating for you? And then we'll go back to some of the points that Alexandra just raised.
There was something actually that was in the digital session, which was, I think it was Merrick who said from SALT. She said, what we were trying to sustain was the 20th century, not the 21st century in a museum. And that, because of lockdown, has given us a chance to reset the museum and rethink about what a museum is and what agency a museum has for change. In our session, which apologize again, it was beset by a few feedback issues, which meant it was quite difficult to follow the thread at some points. But key thing that came across, I think, for all the speakers was timescale. Whether it's you're talking about evolutionary timescales or you're talking about the longevity of the museum planning cycle, in the sense that it can actually be an advantage compared to the short-termism of political cycles when you're talking about effecting environmental change. And that was really important. We also talked about the limits, the fact that human beings have limits, and the way the museum can help us to realize that, because that's quite difficult to visualize or conceptualize or even have an emotional connection to, which you can do within the museum context. We talked about the importance of having a policy framework. And we also talked about how what's going on outside the museum that we can bring in. So all these main headline topics today, like digital, like community, like environment, the centers of knowledge do not rest within in the museum. They rest outside. And it's how the museum can interact and bring that in and be more than the sum of those parts, if you like, as a consolidator of best human knowledge so that we can face the future.
That's great. Thank you, Jenny. And Sophia, what's resonating?
Well, a lot has been said already from the others that's covering my thoughts. This one word that's stuck in my mind that I think it goes beyond even our discussion today is this word normalization and normalizing and what is being normalized or we're trying to normalize. So regarding museums as spaces, for example, I realized that in order to really create a third space, a welcoming space, an open space, a comfort, whatever you call it, somewhere where people trust to feel comfortable entering, it needs a lot of work from within, and it needs a lot of work to be able to include and normalize difference, as Anna Saylor said, or normalize diversity without othering again. So being able to create naturally programs that include everybody, irrespectively of whether these programs are particularly addressed to migrants or to people with hearing issues or to whatever shouldn't be differentiated within a museum environment.
That's great. I want to go back to a theme that Alexandra just raised, and something that really has been standing out for me from listening to the talks is this role of expertise. You know, museums have always been those trusted sources, but in this new era of being true community organizations or true community partners, how will we share the role of expertise? You know, if it's not the staff who have it, but the public, what does that start to look like? Alexandra, what does that mean for you from what you heard today in some of the talks? And then we'll go, and then I'll call on some others.
I think that it basically means that the museum professionals have to become more of facilitators rather than the sole source of knowledge. I see, I see this as a development of the role of the museum professional. Instead of being, a single source of knowledge, has to be able to bring together all the knowledge that exists out there. And it all starts from recognizing that there's not just one kind of knowledge, but we're talking about knowledges in the plural and many different ways and many different knowledges, basically. So that goes beyond, for me, this goes beyond co-creation and inviting the community to come to the museum and co-create with the museum. It goes a little bit deeper. It goes into actually accepting that there are other people who are more knowledgeable about things that we do and we have in our institution. And I think that this is a major shift. It's not an easy one to do, but this is the direction that I can see the profession going, if that makes sense.
It does, it does. I have a friend who says that we have to equally value learned knowledge with lived knowledge. So on that, I'm going to pass it over to Sophia, then Pro, and then Jenny.
I think together with sharing or passing or accepting that you don't have the full knowledge or knowledges, it's also the issue of authority and authorship that again leads back to creating not only a trustworthy space, but also a comfortable space. Because still, I think at least in Europe, a lot of museums are still not as welcoming as they could be. So I think now there's an opportunity to be able to share the fact that we don't know everything about them. I mean, for me, the pandemic period has been an opportunity to try things out without expecting the results to come out perfectly.
So welcoming
this
failure,
is a way to
embracing
learn.
it.
Yes, welcome and failure. And this includes learning, for example, new skills. As a museum professional, now I'm talking. Creating videos on my own, for example. Back in March, we did a completely do-it-yourself video within the museum that you would never accept to do it, you know, as as an experiment if it weren't for the urgency of the days. But now I feel that I've acquired extra skills that I wouldn't if it wasn't for the urgency of it. And this is how going back to what Alexandra was saying, this is sometimes how skills are acquired.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Jenny, Pro?
Yeah. Catherine Devine said something about that thing about we always had these skills and it took the time scale to invent it. And I really liked something that I think, Sophia, you said about accessibility, which was, it was about diminishing otherness. And I'm still thinking about that. I haven't processed that yet, what that means, but that was lovely. And I could have listened to Dr. Spencer Crew all day. He was wonderful with endless ideas fountain was coming out there. That was just rather marvelous. But it does go back, I think the thing that came back to me again and again was about how museums are a device for change and a device for bringing the outside in, and then somehow taking different elements of this and it's what we do, what the museum does with it, how it synthesizes the digital and the environmental and the community. And it's the structure that's already there. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. It's how we can, how the museum can cook it, if you like, for the human experience.
That's great, thank you. Pro, how do we embrace the expertise of our public, the expertise of our communities?
I think what it comes out of this experience and out also of the discussions we had with the panel is that you need to be able to be open, both in terms of how you release your material, but also how you manage to get this feedback. And it's not just feedback, it's something that you have to allow them to co-form with you. And I think one of the let's say the learnings from this period is that the professionals working in museums, in a sense, they are more relevant today than they've ever been, because their work is to provide different types of taxonomies, to question taxonomies, and make people develop their own narratives. To a great extent, visiting a museum is an exercise of emancipation. If it's done correctly by the institution, it allows you to form your own trajectories, and you can. It's not something that is prescribed anymore, or at least we're trying not to make it prescribed anymore. And I think in the digital space, the major, I think the biggest, let's say, challenge, but at the same time, going back to what Jenny also mentioned, what Meric Onur mentioned in our panel, it's time to rethink what we are as an institution and how do we make our collections available. We're not just there to do exhibitions. We have to be able to help people to navigate through information and make decisions which are based on information, and living in an era of a lot of misinformation, a lot of alternate realities, a lot of post-truth. I think museums have a role to play in making people make rational or not less rational, but at least information-based decisions.
That's great, Pro. So Pro mentioned something just now I think is really interesting. From what you all have been hearing today and listening to the panel speak and seeing the questions, does the CoMuseum community think that the museum professionals have the right skills, or do we need to quickly continue to adopt new skills and do, as Sophia was saying, kind of jump into the deep end and acquire the skills that we're going to need to keep doing this new work? Alexandra, from your work with students, what are you seeing? And then we'll bounce around to others.
I think that we need new skills, all of us, and we will need new skills all the time because the world changes, everything changes. I think that museum work also changes. I think that we are talking. For example, I was listening to Dr. Merriman talking earlier, and I was thinking, here we have a different model of talking about museum business. We were not talking about a collection. We were not talking about not even programming as such, but we were talking about the museum opening up to a different time scale and a different set of being, really. Very ontological, at least to me, it was a very ontological presentation in terms of, of the museum world. So if things change like that, we cannot keep up unless we develop more and more skills, unless we polish the skills that we have and we continue evolving in a way.
So there's an evolution here. Jenny,
Yes.
What do you think?
Well, we had a lot of talk about evolution on our panel, and the idea that humans need to be reinserted back into the ecosystem and the limits of evolution. But one of the things, because which I think was quite challenging, was how you have greening the museums and you have the connection with wellness. And Professor Leconte made a very good point about the existential crisis that we're in now with the sort of anxiety of COVID-19 is partly to do with differing timescales. We've lost a year. Where has it gone for everybody in the sort of collective psyche? So there are lots of different issues about timescales and the anxiety around them. If you go to a museum, you can see the timescales are not just the one you're in. There are ones that are thousands, millions of years old, and it gives you a kind of peace or a kind of spiritual reconnection with a bigger frame of mind. And I think that is what museums can do. And when you talked, Adam, your original question was, do museums have the skills? Yes, I think they do. It's under our very noses. It's just knowing how to reapply them in this current circumstances.
So we have to know we have to be able to name it and then be able to know what we're looking for.
It's what you were saying. If you name it, it's I won't say containable, but it's something you can start to heal. You can start to grow from that.
And what we're talking about is when you have a problem, to be able to name it and have that shared language allows the group to be able to start to tackle something. Pro, what do you think?
I think the I'll slightly deviate to end up at the same conclusion, but we certainly need skills, and we certainly need new skills. But I would be very careful with terms like reskilling or constantly seeing skills, because they also make the cultural worker appear as a resource herself, and as being something which is disposable or something that constantly needs to be able to adapt, just to convert to actually be reality. But you cannot be an organization which aims and aspires to be radical and to be able to provide new things and novel thinking, and at the same time totally follow a certain orthodoxy of how we understand our workforce. So I think this is a very important thing. Even if we are to provide skills to cultural workers, it has to be done in a way that empowers them, emancipates them, not one that actually enslaves them. And I had this discussion earlier, these fireside discussions with Catherine from Microsoft, and she mentioned something that the information, the change is something very, very familiar in the information world, and when technology world comes into museums and becomes an integral element of the museums world. But the question is still there. What does it mean for the cultural worker? does it really emancipate them?
It's a great point to leave it at. It's really a lot to think about. Sophia, how is this resonating with you, what Pro just shared?
No, I keep thinking that, yes, skills, maybe we have them, maybe we don't, soft skills, hard skills, we can acquire them or not. I think the most important thing is to change our mentalities. And from what also I saw today, I mean, I, in a sense, consider myself daring to try things out, although I don't know how to do them. Like today's conference, for example, I've never been on a studio doing a flow production like that. But I realized that you cannot do this on your own completely ever. Change has to come from within, and I insist, after I saw the organizational chart of Laurie Danford's museum and the Auckland Museum, I realized that it comes organically, it takes time, and it is very important to have these parallel speeds. They don't have to be the same. Not everybody has to be past and radical and changing, nor everybody has to be stuck traditional mainstream. There will always be parallel speeds, but you do need those different dynamics coming in, and then they end up bringing a result after some time. So you need to be patient, for me. You need to be ready to see mistakes without being critical, try out again. So expect wrongs, many wrongs. And then in order to create this total whole larger than its sum, to be able to have an understanding, solidarity, how can I say it, to say it's okay and move on and try something else. So it's a change of mentality and the acquisition of skills.
That's really great. Sophia, I actually want to acknowledge and appreciate your vulnerability for sharing that this was new and different for you. And I think that's really important, that we have to be willing to acknowledge the radical change that we're all going through and how we're learning to work differently. And also as an industry, be accepting of change. Let's go talk real quickly about third space. For those online listening to us, let me just share what that is. The first space is where you live. Your second space is where you work. And the third space is where you go to be part of a community. Now, in this pandemic period of life, living in COVID, those could be one and the same spaces. But the role of the museum is really shifted, and especially now that we are presenting ourselves in a digital presence. I'd love to go back and talk a little bit more about this role of the third space. Is this a thing that we can achieve as museums, or do we really need to be thinking differently about museums as a second space, or museums as a fourth space, where it all comes together and we're part of the job market, so to speak? Jenny, would you help us think through this a little bit more?
Yes, I think all the way threaded through the panel discussion about greening the museum it was fulfilling a spiritual place in the community. We live in an increasingly secular society. For people, you can go to a place of religion and pray, or you can go to a museum. It is about taking us out of ourselves and into another place. And you can't do that at work. You can, you just have the same sort of armor that you put on when you go to work every day. You take it off when you come home. But it's actually about where you go for exploring and stretching the human mind and the human spirit. And as we were saying earlier, it's about timescales. If you understand that where we fit into the grander scheme of things, it helps us to navigate these uncertain and choppy waters. And so for that reason, you need both a physical and a conceptual space of a museum as a third space.
That's great. Pro, what's your take here?
Yeah, I think it's a difficult question. It's a difficult question because what we wish to be is not necessarily what we are, and as institutions, same as persons as well. I think a museum is, I would agree with Jenny, in a sense you feel it very, very frequently as a sanctuary. It's a place where you think you can actually go and either reflect or in multiple ways to get out of a normal or your daily routine. But at the same time, it's a place where people work. It's a place which is a social place. and it's also a place which also brings you, it brings forward different concepts of what is considered as art or what is considered as history. So it has multiple dimensions. But if I were to say one thing, is I would quote Dana Baird and her book and her title, which says a cultural institution should be as radical as a shelter, as a salad, and as a mother. It has to be radical as a shelter because it has to provide shelter to ideas, new ideas. It has to be radical as a salad because you have to be able to combine different things. And at the end of the day, you have to be able to eat it. And finally, you have to be radical as a mother because the mother spends a lot of time, with her babies, and then she has to let them go. So I think that's the thing. That's what we should be.
I love that. Radical as a shelter, salad, and what was the third one?
As a mother.
As a mother. That's fantastic.
The most radical of all.
The most radical of all. Alexandra, from your work as a professor and teaching the next generation or the current generation of museum worker, museum enthusiasts, all the folks involved in our community, can we teach this? Can we teach people to embrace museums as the first, second, and third space?
Well, this is a tough one. Before I answer it, I will. But before I answer it, I really like this, shelter, salad, and mother radicalism, because what not worries me, but kind of scares me, is to think of museums just as places where we can find peace. Because this is connected very much to the museum as a neutral space. And personally, I don't believe that museums are neutral spaces. I believe that museums project ideas and make arguments, even when they try to be neutral spaces. And sometimes these arguments and the ideas that they are projected by being neutral spaces are not the ones that promote the social justice issues and the human rights issues like we have been talking about. So, I'm very keen on the salad side, but I'm not sure that I would focus so much on the shelter and the mother side. But again, I may have everything wrong here. So from my perspective, and to answer your question, Adam, I think that we can teach students, and this is what I try to do at least, teach students to think constantly about and creatively about what it is that they can do, so that they can make the most as museum professionals. They can make the most with what they have, and they have enormous power and resources and people. I mean, resources of all sorts, and people, a very important resource, and the trust of people, which is even more important. And I believe that this is a lot of responsibility. So what I'm trying to teach my students is that they have to understand their responsibility and make the most of it once they get into the museum, because the museum can be it can be a second, not a first, but a second, and a third space and a fourth space maybe. But in all these categories of space, there is a lot, not just, there are a lot at stake. So I think that there's a lot at stake. So I think that they should be very, very considerate and careful about that. Museums come with power. And I think that the word power is a word that has come up, many times in our discussions today. And museums come with power, and using this power wisely, I think that this is a very important thing. This is the most important thing from my side.
That's really great. Unfortunately, this is a 30-minute conversation, and we really could have spent the entire day talking. We've been talking actually for quite some time to think about this one. So what I want to ask everyone is that takeaway from today. What are those seeds that you will then come back to your own lives, your own gardens, your own institutions, your own families? What are your individual takeaways? And just please, keep it brief. And then what we're going to do is turn over the end of this panel to my friend Sophia, and she's going to help us wrap up. Alexandra, let's just kick back off to you, and then we'll just go around. What's your takeaway from today?
I think that I will stick to my favorite phrase of the day, a phrase by Dr. Crew. So I will repeat, I think the third or fourth time. Museums are places that empower people emotionally and intellectually. And I want to think more about how we can do it and you know, try to make this happen in any way I can personally.
Alexandra, thank you so much. That's really powerful. And I'm also going to be thinking about that a lot. Jenny, what is the C that you take away? What's the action steps you take from this conference?
Well, when I started this conference, I thought it was about how do you green a museum? Because that's what it said in the discussion title. But I realize it's actually about dealing with something greater than that, that museums have a role to deal with this collective trauma that we're all facing right now, which is to remind us and plug us back into a higher form of ourselves on a higher sort of greater existence, that it's like a universe. You step into a museum and it should be that we see how we want to be rather than what we temporarily are going through. So it's something that transcends the immediate existential time and space traumas and anxieties.
That's great. Pro?
I would say there are quite a few things, but I'll just stick to one, which is again from Marriage Honor. What 2020 has taught us is we are in the 21st century. That's it, you know, that's the 21st century. So we have to deal with it. The thing is, let's try to make our best out of this 21st century. It's not the best place in the world, possibly, but let's try to make the best out of this.
For myself, before I pass on to Sophia, I think it's what you've all shared. It's that we are always changing, regardless of how we think about change. It's happening, and to come at it with an open mind, a beginner's mindset, and to keep learning, to keep evolving, and to make our organizations better ones. Sophia, what is your takeaway? What will you do?
My takeaway is always, as an anthropologist that I am, and that's where the othering comes, Janet. Behind museums, there are people who get tired, people who get burned sometime in trying to do something, people who make mistakes, people who take decisions. So in order to be, so museums, of course, they cannot be neutral, Alexandra, but I'm certain that there are ways in making them comfortable for everything, making them welcoming for everybody, even as buildings, even as spaces, as facilities, even to make them in, you know, third spaces, for example. You said, Adam, I had a great story to share regarding your talk about third spaces two years ago, but I'll say it some other time. So it's this, there are people, we're all with a level of understanding capable of creating for each other comfortable spaces as hosts. So the same thing should be possible within a museum. I don't know if it...
That's great. And with that, the floor is yours.
The floor is mine to close this day. It's almost 9 o'clock, with a great number of thank yous for the whole production, to all our speakers and panel moderators, to you and all the rest. Thank you very much. We wouldn't have done it without you. And to our audience, we still have 200 people online after more than 5 hours, 6 hours. Very impressive. Thank you very much. Now would be applause. To the team, the CoMuseum team, Eleni Alexaki from the US Embassy, Maria Papaioannou from the British Council, Katerina Gugiuli, our project manager, Katerina Galani from the British Council, Ioanna Koutsounanou from the US Embassy. All these people you won't see at all today. They're all over the place, even not in Athens, all of them. On social media, we had Dina Diora and Zina Sotiropoulou. A big thank you to our awesome Adam Rozan, and I'm saying it again because he is our advisory committee, literally. We have one person and it's him, so he's been helping us throughout very much in everything. My colleagues at the Benaki Museum, Giorgi Magini, our academic director, Maria Throuvala, Nicoletta Mendy, Athina Isaia, Yana Chobanoglu, and all the IT department. From the British Council, Anastasia Andrichou, the director who's always been on our side, and Chrysula Melidou, as well as the rest of the BC team. The US Embassy, Cynthia Harvey, Jennifer Schuler, and all the US Embassy team. The Goethe Institute, Stephanie Peter, Karen Neishold, and Natalia Sartori. Now we would have applause in between, but now I'm saying one after the other. The French Institute and the French Embassy, Nadia Sartawi, Dimitra Michou, Patrick Comeau, of course, and Marie-Laure Kulman-Kuchaftis. Thank you again to the Ministry of Culture and the municipalities of Athens and Thessaloniki for their auspices. And for this year, a very big thank you again to our sponsors. They have been part of the team now, whether they like it or not. Vanessa Doniadou and Plutarchos Rigas from Microsoft, and our strategic partner, Unisystems, especially Thaya Chalkidji, who's always been on our side, Vicky Boufi. They've created our website as well, Elias Aliferis and Christina Chaniotaki for the website, and our intern, Elias Chimas, who's been helping us feed the website. So thank you very much also to the company Avitron, who helped us with the production of today's digital conference, and especially Yannis Papagiorgopoulos and his team at Avitron. He's really impressive the way he's dealt with all us women bombing him with requests for the past month. And I'm going to finish with a note. Many of you have registered for the workshops, and I hope you have received your confirmations. If you haven't, you can still send an email at info@thecomuseum.org. They're happening tomorrow and on Friday. And please do not forget to fill in our survey. We will send it out by the end of the conference on Friday. And what else can I say? Let's all, again, cross our fingers and hope that this time next year or even earlier, we meet in person physically and go down to the Benaki Museum Cafe for a glass of wine. Thank you very much and good night to everybody.